Okay. It's afternoon. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. How are you all doing? Is there queer people in this? I thought so. Welcome to this fantastic panel, yes, exploring the queer imaginary, alternative queer pasts and presence. So you can see that I'm really ready. I've got 3 drinks. I have a tea, I have water, I have wine. So I'm really ready for this hour. So it's going to go really fast because we've got 3 amazing speakers that I am going to, be interviewing. Yes, thank you. 3 really just gorgeous people. I'm an academic, so everything for me starts with an introduction. So I will introduce them just briefly so we have a sense of these amazing people. To my immediate left is, of course, Maneo Mohale, who is a feminist, a writer and poet, long-listed twice for the Sol Plaatje European Union Poetry Anthology Award. Twice, yes, for the fabulous Everything is a Death and Flower, which was also shortlisted for the Ingrid Jonker Poetry Prize and won the 2020 Glenn Luce Prize for African Poetry. And then in the middle, we have Kelly-Eve Koopman, who is absolutely beautiful, a writer and artivist, right? She has written and published her memoir, Because I Couldn't Kill You, long-listed for the Sunday Times National Book Award in 2019. Yes. She has also curated, co-curated the LGBTQIA anthology called They Called Me Queer. Oh, wow. Okay. And of course, as it so happens, both Maneo and I are in this collection. And then, last but certainly not least, Kopano Maroga is a performance artist, writer, educator, and cultural worker. Their poetry collection, Jesus Thesis and Other Critical Fabulations, which is an amazing title, was shortlisted for the National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences Award for Best Fiction Poetry. The collection was translated into German in 2023.
That's right.
I mean, look at that, right? So, and I also learned that you were in Belgium at some point.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Belgium.
To my
Ghent.
detriment.
Yeah. Yeah, I spent a little time there too.
Mm-hmm. I apologize.
Thanks.
My condolences.
Yeah. And also, can we talk about the over-representation of Benoni on the stage?
Oh.
Very strong language.
That's a lot. That's a lot to say, and the East Strand remembers.
Yes. I love this, though. I have to say, I want to go drink the water of Benoni because it looks like great things come out of there. So today I want to begin by asking, right? What if the past that we have inherited wasn't the only one that ever existed, right? What if the histories we are told were never quite complete? And never quite neutral? And what if by imagining differently, we might not only reclaim what was lost, but radically reorient what is yet to come? The queer imaginary invites us to do just that, to travel through time, sideways, diagonally, backwards, and forwards, not to escape reality, but to expose the many realities that have been suppressed, distorted, and altogether erased. It is a mode of dreaming, remembering, and world-making that reimagines history through a queer lens, not as a fixed narrative, but as a living archive, open to reinterpretation and, of course, refusal. Consider the question, what if the key figures of our history, political leaders, artists, revolutionaries, were understood as queer? not in a tokenizing way, but as part of a richer, more complex understanding of desire, of kinship, and gender expression. How might our current politics, our art, our understandings of power and identity look different? In Southern Africa, particularly perhaps for us in South Africa, the archives have traditionally been tools of colonial and patriarchal control. But of course, the queer and the feminist artists and scholars, these three sitting here, have powerfully reclaimed them, remixing, reframing, and rewriting, right? We can take the example of Koopy, daughter of District 6 exhibition, which brought to life the vibrant life of Koopy. We can consider the baddies of Isandlwana by Desire Maroga, a haunting and glorious reimagining of the 1879 Anglo-Zulu battle. In their multimedia work, Maroga queers not only the narrative of war, but of masculinity, of nationhood, but also of history itself. So to speak of queer pasts, then, is to speak of possibility. As Munoz reminds us, queerness is not just in the past or the present, it is in the horizon, a future that is not yet here, but deeply felt. In his words, it is an insistence on the there and the then, a refusal to settle for the world as it is, and in favor of imagining the world as it could be. My first question to my fabulous panel then is, Kelly and I just briefly spoke about, maybe I need to position this as well, we spoke about the difficulty of thinking about time currently, living in time of genocide, to think about the queer, to think about the queer body, to think about the body in general. And so you can position that however you will. And so to say that time is a very difficult concept right now. But I want to think about history, I want to think about the archive, because for the queer self, history and the archive are incredibly difficult. Whether personal or otherwise, how do you navigate, particularly the thorny thing about accuracy of history and the imagination?
I'm going to be a bully because I'm going to ask Kopano, I'm going to throw it down to Kopano because I know that fabulation is a huge part of your practice.
Dumb me, daddy.
Yeah.
You want to be on top?
You deserve it, baby girl. So I think this is your question and then we can riff off that.
Hot.
Yeah.
I'm into it. Yeah. Yeah. I suppose if we think about history as memory, and we understand that memory is never conclusive, is never necessarily an entire picture, I think that a lot of things open up. So the collection, this term fabulation, critical fabulation, comes from Saidiya Hartman, who's a fantastic scholar and is very busy with this project of memory work in the archive and how do we relate to it, and what Lwando is also alluding to in terms of the coloniality of the archive. And I come from an anthropology background, and these girls are so shady because it's only in the final year that they teach us about, anthropology as the handmaiden of colonialism. And I was like, why didn't you lead with that? Because now I'm implicated, right? But it was great that they framed it in that way when we were ready to have that framing in a certain way. But all of this to say that there are deeply oppressive usages of the archive, as I think a lot of us know and understand. And something like critical fabulation is asking the question about, without disturbing the veracity of a historical event, right? So keeping to as much of the facticity that we know, what is possible when we narrate fiction into where there are gaps, and how can that help us reread certain moments in history? And in Hartman's work, this is predominantly in relation to the transatlantic slave trade, and trying to imagine, because there is so much archival material from that time, but the framing is ostensibly, what's a good word? denigrating for people of color, right? That it is only a history of subjugation or a history of incredible defiance, right? So it's either that you are subservient or you're a hero, but there's not the possibility of anything in between. And she fabulates or uses fabulation to ask the question of how do we insert humanity and breadth into the lives that people did live. As much as we live our lives in all their complexity, they live their lives in that complexity as well. And what kind of narrative justice might be possible in imagining all the ways that they could have existed as opposed to accepting the dominant narrative from history with a capital H?
One of my favorite scholars and books that I seem to return to is this academic but also really delicious book called Black on Both Sides, A Racial History of Trans Identity by C. Riley Snorton. And C. Riley starts off with Fanon as like as an epigraph, and I'm going to butcher it because I do. There's like a line that Fanon sort of explores from Black Skin, White Masks, and he says that our problem is not necessarily a problem of power, or our problem is not even a problem of race. Our problem is a problem of time. And in thinking about queerness and trans identity, that really snapped me into focus to be like, what do you mean the problem of sexuality and gender is a problem of time? And this very careful unfolding then happens, is that everything that we understand about history, the historicity of history, and for like someone, a student of history like me, the historiography, what we say about what happened, who gets to talk, what gets to be remembered, whose voices matter, the kind of silences and the gaps in the archive, that Western, but particularly white Western, modes of thought are obsessed with progress, like this idea of like this happened and this happened and this happened, but there is a linear progression to something better. And that's all duped us into this very intense bullshit to understand that what we have now is supposedly better than the past. When those of us who carry in our bodies and in our brains, in our lineages, in our blood, in our spirit, in our bloodlines. Oh, I'm preaching. I'm like, ooh. Yes, already. Yes. I'm like, ooh. Already in our bloodlines. A deep history when we know that we have lost things, and not just lost things were taken from us. So this idea of linear progress is a lie, and it's a lie that conceals many lies, that on a bedrock of lies. So when time is the real texture when you explode it. And for someone super nerdy like me, and when I think about even the quantum texture of time, what we know and tell of time, and queers understand this on a level, even if we can't articulate it, we understand it in a deep bone marrow level, that we live outside of time. We if as sluts for Munoz, because you said daddy and I said Jose Esteban Munoz, dad, father, who says that all queers we're time travelers. That we live a life that is not yet here. We are of the future. We are astronauts. And I love that so much. It gives me so much comfort, especially now.
I think that was such a great framing, and thank you for the amazing provocation. Just to come back to that, I also want to re-invoke activists in this, and also say that the revolution is queer. We've come under this mode of we need to represent ourselves. Things about queerness are about representing our bodies, our genders, our sexualities, and of course that's important, but representation doesn't mean our liberation. And what you asked at the beginning of the session was, how do we reframe or reinvoke what queerness means? And I think in this practice of remembering, re-archiving, fabulating, that is queerness is a verb in that way. It's about the practice of reimagining and rethinking these systems. It is about challenging ourselves and calling ourselves to embody how we remember and what that means for how we govern the present. Because the present is just a set of principles that have been agreed upon through various violent historical processes. And as you were saying, we have every prerogative to reimagine that, and we do. So I'd say the invocation of the future, or the now as the future, is really, really important, because we're also at this point, this zenith, where where if something doesn't give, I mean, the world is going to shit for queer people, for all of us. And there's something in our embodied wisdom that helps us understand and reimagine pathways where we can rethink that. And just for a little bit of context, earlier we were all talking about, well, I was saying there's a lot of imposter syndrome in sitting on this panel, because I found it really, really hard to write over the last few months. I haven't been able to engage the practice of writing. There is no language. Can't find the language for what's going on. Yeah, but I think in our collective spaces, in spaces like this, where we challenge ourselves to collectively dream and do, because I think there's also a necessary decolonization around the binary between dreaming and doing. That is also very Western Renaissance model, heterocapitalist, right? We dream in our free time, and then we do our work, our labor. Our histories as queer people, our indigenous histories, don't have that binary. In the way we invoke and think about history, dreaming and so-called fact, all historical relics point to the fact that these are the same things. We were always dreaming about the future. And I think it's, I mean, in our activism, in our ways of showing up for each other and building movement, this is the way we're dreaming. You know, activists are relentless dreamers, and I think this reimagination is like a critical resource right now that we have to sort of share and try and, just embody as much as possible.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Sure. I think we can all just go home now. That was really brilliant, the three of you. That was really stunning. That was so beautiful. I mean, you know, the question of that you all touch upon, maybe more forcefully, Maneo, about progress, and it is the very thing that brings violence, right? Like the idea of progress, because it always often only means progress for some, right? And so the progress is always at the destruction of others to create space, literally, right, for others. So it's a incredibly potent thing to think about.
Can I jump on that?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Please.
My favorite definition of queerness is from Mama Bell Hooks, now late departed, and miss her dearly. Her definition of queerness, and I'm going to butcher it again, but I'm going to try my best. She says that queerness isn't necessarily about who you have sex with, or who you fucking. It's not. It could be.
Well, it can be.
It could be.
Yeah.
It could be that, and in many cases, it could be a dimension of that. Sexuality is definitely a dimension of that. But her favorite, the way that she reframes it, is that queerness is more about a self that is fundamentally at odds with the society around it. And that always brings me back and grounds me into something, and also helps me look around me to see who else, pathways of solidarity that aren't locked inside of individuation and identity. The sort of the rancid red meat of identity that's so stuck inside of the body and in the self, but always oriented towards the collective. Yeah.
You know, Kelly, you mentioned the difficulty of writing, which I think many of us who practice, in that way, who do the work of writing, it's an incredibly weird time, right? There's so much going on and so much to process. But I wanted to ask, nonetheless, in terms of, strategies, right? In the works that one does, right? In terms of strategies to use the archive, as it were, and I suppose you were all three alluding to some of this, not just, as you were saying, Kopano, in content, but method and form, right? Method and form. And for you, all three of you, what are your strategies? What are the ways in which you move about, particularly to produce, but also for the question of healing, if one can even approach that?
Yeah, and it's a question, isn't it? Something that has been very generative for me. So I've been a practicing astrologer for 6 years now? I'm on a self-appointed internship with Saturn, for instance. And what has been very generative in the astrology practice and holding space for other people is that together you generate a lot of writing in a certain sense, right? And something that's quite beautiful about looking at somebody's chart or looking at any kind of chart in astrology, there's this beautiful Canadian astrologer, Jessica Lanyadu, who defines astrology as the study of the quality of the passage of time, which is such a beautiful way to think, to go back to this timepiece, thinking about rather than thinking about historicity and facticity, thinking about the qualitative nature of the passage of time, and an astrology chart can tell us a lot about this. So that has been quite a beautiful space, because when I prepare for a reading, there's a lot of writing that happens. I have to look at a lot of information about what aspects and planetary movements there are. And so that's been a big part that has felt very generative in a writing sense, in that is not just about me, but for someone else. So the service element is incredibly useful. And then talking about service, there's this fantastic church that I joined. I was speaking about it yesterday, and there's some very important people that are in the audience that are connected to that space. But one of the things that we did a few weeks ago was a prayer writing workshop. And this was quite something, this giving one's attention to what is it if God was right in front of me, what would I ask for? And what am I in desperate need of in this moment? And how can I give that a shape? And giving it the shape of prayer and petition, something that is meant to be, or part of its intention is to be shared and to be vocalized together, and to draft that and then to share it with the community and then to pray together. This has been a way that writing has felt more possible, right? If it's me in my room, and it's so bizarre right now, and to do writing in a way that feels generative, that feels collective, that feels like it's contributing to some kind of collectivity, is one of the only ways that I've been able to do so in the current moment.
I'd love to come in there if that's okay, just on collectivism. And there are members of writing collectives that I work in here today, which I'm very grateful for. So writing or creation as community, but also reframing what I think about as creation. So protest as creativity, resistance as creativity. And then even with the writing as itself, I think coming from an academic background, you think about writing as the output, but it's also just like the thinking through. Like you're finding the meaning through the writing. So even like the random notes that you write on your iPhone, or the rage or the grief that you might feel that can only come out in stuttering is also when talking about healing as the continuous process, is also like a process of creation in itself. And then I think also thinking about ecologies, or thinking about everything as ecologies, has been very useful. And I also really admire ecological practitioners, some of whom are also here, because I think thinking about the planet and our lived environments as symbiotic to our existence is so important. And I'm like on the verge of tears here, thinking about like the metaphor of olive trees in Palestine, or even looking at the legacies of water and how we think about that, and just how spending time thinking about ecologies, being in ecologies, and thinking about ourselves as part of our environment is, for me, become a creative process as well, because like it's an embodied way of feeling part of creation, and that has been very healing. And then I think also like this demigod of the algorithm has been really like difficult to navigate. Story god that narrates the daily life, which is at once an important tool and also really hard. So I've been thinking about like, what if it's a mycelium and we can connect with each other? And what if we reframe everything as ways of creating community, which is very naive, but it's been very helpful. And then one last thing before I pass on that I must say is that watching the genocide play out in Palestine and the way that Palestinian writers and even online creators consistently find language that forces us to think and feel even just a tiny bit of what that experience is like, because that's the only way that we can be invoked to action, to be forced to understand what's happening. I think I've just thought, like, if you can find language to frame a reality that is so unthinkable, unimaginable, then surely we need to find language for resistance and revolution and reimagination in the face of that as well.
Thank you, Kelly.
I've been crying a lot. Like, I've been doing a lot of crying. I've realized that it's just, and that's brought me right back into the body, that there is no conduit outside of the body. When I think about myself, one of my favorite poets, C.A. Conrad, says that one must find one's body in order to find one's poetry. And that's not as easy as it sounds. Like, I so much, especially about modernity, is about dislocating one from the body. And your attention is captured. Our attention is now the most valuable resource for these, like, Christo-fascist tech bros that are just deeply, deeply, deeply invested in pulling our attention away from our own bodies and pulling our attention away from our communities, pulling our attention away from the world, from the burning of the world in so many different fires in Sudan, in Congo, in Haiti, in Kashmir, in Palestine, here at home. So I found myself just, like, breathing lots, crying lots. Tony Stewart, who's an incredible, incredible writer and doula. I was very lucky to go on a retreat with a few writers who are here and present at the festival, and she told me something. It's like, but you have to think of yourself not just as a storyteller, but as a story keeper. That you, and in order for let's just take a moment.
Real.
Because real, and because of that, you must tend to the vessel, and that we draw our power from our loves, from our families, from the earth. And if the earth is sick and our loves are sick and we're sick, we can't do this work well. We can't show up for other people. We can't even show up for ourselves. So I've just been, like, sitting in heartbreak and sitting in grief and shock and anger and bitterness. And the more that I realized what I was hiding from myself by doom scrolling, or, just distracting myself by the myriad of distractions that modernity offers, that are not nourishing at all, but they're deeply engaging and very fun, but not nourishing in the ways in which ancient technologies, especially black technologies of faith and ritual, that have been so deeply perverted by colonialism
and Christianity,
neocolonialism and such. But I've been swimming and crying a lot.
Real.
Yeah, sure. I'm stuck on language and the difficulty of language and the limits of language, right? But also, of course, and I think as you were alluding to, Kelly, that as the Toni Morrison, the late Toni Morrison, who says, right, at times like this, that's what we do.
This
right?
is precisely the time.
This is
that
precisely the
artists go to
time.
work.
This is precisely the time, right, where we do language, right? We push on, and one becomes a vessel, right, for the times. And in thinking about language, I just went quickly into my phone because, again, speaking about language made me think of the poet Famida Riaz, and the poem, "Come, let us create a new lexicon," wherein is inserted before each word its meaning that we do not like, and let us swallow like bitter potion the truth of a reality that is not ours. The water of life bursting forth from this stone takes a course not determined by us alone. We who are the dying light of a derelict garden, we who are filled with the wounded pride of self-delusion, we who have crossed the limits of self-praise, we who lick each other of our wounds incessantly, we who spread the poisoned chalice all around, carrying only hate for the other. On our dry lips, only words of disdain for the other. We do not feel the abyss within ourselves. We do not see that which is true before our own eyes. We have not redeemed ourselves yesterday or today, for the sickness is so dear that we do not seek to be cured. But why should the many-hued new horizon remain to us distant and unattainable? So why not make a new lexicon? If we emerge from the bleak abyss, only the first few footsteps are hard. The limitless expanses beckons us to the dawning of a new day. We will breathe in the fresh air of the abundant valley that surrounds us. We will cleanse the grime of self-loathing from our faces, to rise and fall in the game time plays. But the image reflected in the mirror of time includes our glory and our accomplishments. So let us raise our sights to friendship and thus glimpse the beauty of every face, of every visitor to the flower-filled garden. We will encounter potentials, a word in which you and me are equal, before which we and they are the same. So come, let us create a new lexicon. Okay, so I have other questions, but maybe I open it up because it's a huge room and I bet there's really lovely, thick questions.
We got some thickies in the room.
Yeah. And so, but please, we have an hour and we've already eaten half of it. So reserve the essay for ANC meetings. Succinct, to the point, beautiful, and we'll take like 3 and then we'll see how far we get from that. Thanks, and I will cut you.
I've seen it happen. It's really hard. Yeah.
So, can we ask 1 or 2 questions in
You
one
can
go?
do 2 if they're really short.
Okay, if they're really short.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
right.
You're
Okay,
brave.
so, right. I have 2 questions. Very clear, very concise. The first question, I don't remember who exactly mentioned this, is I'd like an expanded answer or a description of what you mean by queers are time travelers. And then the next question is, what is the idea of thinking as a collective beyond our identities of self? Who are the collective, and what does that collective culture mean and look like? That is the question.
Excellent.
That's a great example how this
Model question.
we'll take some, maybe 2 more people.
My question is still a bit messy, so please take off it what you will. So as we're speaking, I was thinking of the character Hippolyta from Lovecraft country. As we were speaking, I was thinking of a quote by Umamulo Reta Ngobo from her book, And They Didn't Die. And she mentioned how, I'm gonna butcher it, oh my God. So, the essence is basically like it's community that we protect each other from the extremes of need. With that episode of Hippolyta and, queerness and being futuristic, and her encounter with Josephine Baker, and also the interaction between Ferry Jele and Mabato Monto's characters in Unomalanga and the Witch, the subtle queerness, so to speak, within that movie. What would you say is the what is the gravity and importance of time when it comes to having concepts that exist continuously with us on the everyday, but are not particularly acknowledged because of a lack of either A, vocabulary, or B, the everyday interactions, or C, the greater structures that exist that don't necessarily acknowledge the everydayness of these. Take what you will.
I want to answer that one.
All right, thank you. Do you have maybe one more? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, right here in the front.
Yes. Hold my drink while I kiss your girlfriend.
Epic.
I love this t-shirt.
So good.
Hello, crushes. My neurodivergent brain is doing a million things I'm going to try. A lot of the spaces that I've been moving in and the conversations that I've been having over the last 2 years, one of the things that I've been noticing and also finding myself doing is that there seems to be a very strong pull and very active intention around this sort of return of this indigenous, fundamentally human knowledge that we're trying to sort of grapple with in this context, because so much of the capitalist machine is divorcing our identities, the body, from who we are and how we engage with the world. And so many of those conversations and spaces that I've been in have been a deliberate attempt to return to this sort of this renaissance of queerness and what that looks like and how it shows up in our work, in our cultures, in our communities. And everything that you've been sort of saying has been affirming a lot of that for me. And I guess my question is, what does that look like for you in terms of your hopes for the future? Because it's a very optimistic thing and a really wonderful thing for me, and I'm wondering what you see for that for the future. Yeah.
Nice question.
In whatever order.
Yeah.
Please take the time travel one first.
Cool. I'll do the time travel. I'll do the time travel one first because it lets me talk about daddy. So, yes. What we mean, or when we say that queer people are astronauts or time travelers, Munoz told us that queerness is not yet here. In that when we look outside, when we look at the media that is reflected to us, when we look at the structures of governance, when we even look at our family and kinship structures, we don't necessarily see ourselves reflected. Not always. It's not necessary. It changes. It's deeply fluid. Time is a very fast river, very wide. But in living as we are right now, that we're harbingers of the future, that we are already, that we're bringing the future closer to us by living as we are. That's what I suppose in a kernel sense, so that also Lwando doesn't cut me. But I would highly recommend, also because this is also when I put my teacher hat on, is go searching for texts. It's just, there's just so much richness in the ways in which our theorists, our elders, our contemporaries are figuring these questions out. So yes, that's what we mean by time travelers. And then I'll get to Zoe's question, but I want to think about this first.
Can I take the Lovecraft Country question?
Hot.
Forgive me because I'm not super familiar with your second reference, but I know the writer you're talking about, so I'm going to try and navigate my way through it. But I love that you mentioned Lovecraft Country. For anyone who hasn't seen it, it's a great TV show. It's available on Showmax. Why do I know that? I don't know. But it is a reimagining of H.P. Lovecraft's work, who was a freaking raging racist and misogynist. And is number one credited with being like the founding father of the speculative fiction genre, which is not true. In terms of like Western tradition of knowledge, which is also problematic, it was Mary Shelley who wrote Frankenstein when she was 17.
Mom,
17.
Mommy.
But beyond that, we know we've been doing this thing on cave walls and through oral tradition forever. So let's, not even think about that. But I think that is such a great invocation of narrative reframing and a show or a way of thinking that is so queer at its heart, because maybe we can talk a bit about Afro-Surrealism here, because I read Lovecraft Country as an Afro-Surrealist text in the same way that Donald Glover's Atlanta is. The Invisible Man is an Afro-Surrealist text. Who wrote The Invisible Man again?
Rolf Ellison.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think those texts are really interesting. Let's just take a pause for that. I was like, one of the Benoni poets is going to know who wrote them, so I'm just going to toss it out there.
Obsessed.
And I think Afro-Surrealism is a really great provocation for us to think about parallel presence. Toni Morrison also writes in an Afro-Surrealist mode, where the internal or embodied emotional experience is as factual or as relevant or as much a real narrative driver as the so-called external experience. And I come to these texts a lot when trying to frame reality beyond the sort of hetero-capitalist mode at the moment, where, as you were, to come back to your first question, in terms of our exclusion from the archive and what is fact and what is fiction, this idea of an embodied reality of feeling, because Lovecraft Country, as with Toni Morrison's work, is all about the feeling of being marginal. Invisible Man, feeling marginalized literally makes the character invisible. I think as queer people and as people living through this era of genocide, of essentially class warfare, of the imperial entity just, governing over us, this idea of our archives, our internal experiences being as valid as the realities projected at us are extremely helpful in like thinking through and how we place ourselves on this timeline, to come back to your time travel and dream travel ideas. So to your question, I think it's such a wonderful framework for speculation and a way that we can think of how we can impose ourselves onto the public imagination.
Or how we're actually already superimposed on the imaginary, right?
Yes,
There's this fantastic episode of a podcast called Something Bros. I can't remember exactly what it is. Fan Bros. And it's Juno Diaz, who has since been cancelled in Me Too situation. But what he says is something along the lines of, without our histories, there is no such thing as a Lord of the Rings. There is no such thing as fantasy, right? A lot of the white imaginary, unfortunately, is so much about our devastation, but our devastation with us erased, right? So there are no black people in Star Wars, there is. There's like what's his name? Samuel L. Jackson. But the existence, but this idea that there's like a black race in space or something like this is completely erased. And this is not to kind of like elevate a kind of like Wakanda Forever situation, because this is a different kind of erasure, right? And we can like it or whatever, but like, like with criticality, I guess, whatever. But so I'm thinking about this and what you're saying as well, because of all these questions, and something that Lwando said made me think about taxonomy. I think you were talking about the limits of language, right? And the taxonomical history of coloniality, that if we can name it, it exists, right? But this goes further into the kind of creation of property rights, right? So that if I have a deed, I own it, right? If you don't have a paper, you cannot own, right? And I guess I'm raising this because there is a danger in participating in taxonomy politics, in the sense that we perpetuate this idea that to name is to make exist. And without name, there can be no existing, right? So there's something to be thought of in that direction. And I think about it also with what you were saying, Zoe, about the elevation of indigeneity and indigenous practices. Just because I've been in Europe and just seeing what the girls do with language in Europe is crazy. Because they will divorce any politic or power from a term like indigeneity and flatten it and reduce it to its representational value, right? Which is what happens in our legal system, right? I think like 10 years ago, there was a big legal case about returning ancestral lands to the San people, and they had to dress in traditional San garb and perform their indigeneity in order to have the validity of it, right? And this is part of this taxonomy culture, right? That is, I think, very dangerous. It's not to say that there's not value, but a lot of the activism that we do is about raising awareness and trying to give language and getting pronouns right, and who's a trans person, who's not a trans person. So much of that is zoological, imaginary logics, right? Which cage are we meant to put you in, right? So if we understand ourselves as queer people, then my question is like, how invested can we be in such a politic if our desire is to break free, supposedly, of boundaries? Which then makes me think of Adrienne Marie Brown, I think in Emergent Strategy, when she says that we need to be honest about the ways that we participate in our own oppression. And so in thinking about that, then it makes me think about time traveling, right? Because not only are we from the future, but we're also from the past, in that the dead speak through us, right? So every time we manifest the name of Munoz, for example, or Hooks, we are talking to the dead, right? Morrison, right? Sitting with their texts is to sit with the dead. And something that I wanted to say also about what Kelly was saying, in terms of Afro-surreality, because the references that you were using are largely like North American, and I think that's fantastic, because there's a really great scholar, Bonnie Greer, who introduced me to this concept of the African continuum. So thinking about Black America as a continuum of Africa, I think is a very generative project, right, to put it within that framework. And the reason I think that that's generative in some ways and potentially troubling in others is that it removes, or it speaks to, in quite a generative way, I think, our collective history, that we are connected in very important ways. And I mean, speaking about the Black imaginary as well, I mean, language is whatever, right? I think this is the importance, I think, of what I was saying about the taxonomy is like, how is it that we can use language as a boon, but not as a prescriptor, not as something that is necessary in order to fix something in place. So if we use the term African continuum, or we use the term Black imaginary, I think these are both, they have generative, they have generative value. But I think thinking about how to allow for precision, or move towards precision, while also allowing for a certain poetics in what it is that we might mean, right? And I think this is the not yet here-ness of queerness, right? That we give it a name as a placeholder, right? So I call myself non-binary today. I call myself pansexual today, but I'm in continuous motion. So it's hearkening to a certain kind of becoming,
Futurity.
To it to come.
That was delicious and
That was-
expansive
and delicious.
Wow. And also we're percolating now. I love this moment where it's like everything is boiling.
Vibing.
I was thinking about what to respond to about indigeneity, and because I'm a slut, I'm really interested in the erotic, and I think that's the space in which that's really like rising in my consciousness and in my body, to just think about eros, but an unexpected byproduct maybe of like thinking about eros, the erotic, the body, sites of history, the ways in which the Black femme body, the way that I'm embodied, is always already sexualized in these incredibly violent ways, has like, again, collapsed my own individuation to really think about like the body, body. And that's led me deeper and deeper, and I'm so grateful for this, but to the work of like disability scholars and Leah Lakshmi Pipshna Samarasana, who drew me into a way of thinking about care, but thinking about care politically, and the ways in which care is such a gendered, still incredibly gendered way of thinking, that we are, even in our most radical spaces, even in our most intimate relationships, there's like a certain level of work that is like deeply feminized, but like so invisibilized underneath capitalist modes of thinking. And like sex work, like so much of my thinking, the edge of my thinking, like the text, the sacred texts are conversations and learnings from sex workers. And so much of my politic is sharpened and brought into the world through the work of disability writers, disability scholars. And I've come to understand the mountains blocking me. And I'm like, also heartbreak is like a beautiful thing, because it like makes you walk backwards, and you look for the texts that like nourished you when you were 8 years old and 16 years old and 14 years old. And I picked up Nari Wahid again, and the mantra that I say to myself is like, you don't always have to be a fire for every mountain blocking you. Sometimes you can be a river and soft river yourself to freedom. And I feel like that in itself is like all queer people. There's so much blocking us. There's so much blocking us to an idea, even when we don't even know what it is, the kind of world that we want. But we know that it's not this one. And we know that it's like, I don't even know the kind of sex I want to have, but I know it's not this kind, you know? But, or in these deeply ephemeral moments, that it's just like, I experience the future and the world that I have, like, in the height of pleasure with lovers and partners, and in the care that comes afterwards. There is such magic, and that's when I feel closest to my ancestors. Like, the sluttier I become, the more I feel like that, like the blacker I am, the hotter I am, like the stronger I am, the angrier I am, the more awake I am. And the angrier I feel, the more I'm like, who's angry with me? I know I'm not the only one that feels like this.
Sure. Okay, that was actually very good timing. I want to open this up for more questions, but I literally have 5 minutes.
Oh no.
And
How?
And I do not want to risk this with. Is that question amazing?
I believe in you, Amy.
Don't let me regret this.
No pressure.
Hot.
How many queers does it take to turn on a microphone?
Is that a
1, 2. There we go.
There we go.
Okay, this question is for all three of you. I really liked what you said about going back to the texts. And so I thought it would be a good summary question as well. If you could each say one seminal piece of writing or work or literature that really has sparked for you and inspired your writing in terms of the queer imaginary, what would it be?
Fantastic question.
Was that a good enough question?
That is very satisfying.
Beautiful.
That is a brilliant question. No, so how are we going to do this, since this is the last? I just wanted to say, we could do another hour, like, easily. I loved what you said about Afrofuturity, and it made me think a lot about, there's something weird that's been going on over the past few years about, these kind of dystopian films being filmed in Africa, right? Of the, and this idea that, the kinds of, world that's fallen apart, but at the same time is the future, is situated here, which really is weird, but just putting that down. And then the thing about also naming and taxonomy, which I think is really, really important, conversation around language, which also, it made me actually think about how unseriously we've thought about the epistemology of the closet and the idea of coming out, and the ways in which that sits so difficult on this continent, with the ways in which you are asked to confess, right? And this is not to deny or to, disavow people's claiming of identity, but I think we have to have lots of space for other ways of articulating that are not necessarily, hey, I'm here, I'm gay. And so now I will give you to answer that beautiful question that we received. You are invited next year again. And if we can go this way, because then I also want you to close with.
Perfect.
One book that I really love that I come back to is a book by Larry Mitchell, and it's called The Faggots and Their Friends Between Revolutions.
Ooh.
It's a goodie.
Oh, that was such a good, short, sharp answer. Like, what am I going to say? I've read Below the Salt by Hala Alyan, who's a Palestinian writer, 3 times in the last 2 years. So I guess that's fair. And then I just want to correct myself. It's going to bother me. Leopold Senghor from Senegal is considered the founding father of Afro-Surrealism. So it comes from the continent, obviously. And I have been reading some of Senghor's things and some of Bayo Akamolafe, who does really good work on emergent strategy. And then Toni Morrison. I keep coming back to her all the time. Yeah.
Nice, thanks. There is a really fantastic lecture on YouTube. How scholarly am I?
Love it.
It is called Quantum Entanglement and the Fear Factor. It's by a fantastic black philosopher, Joy James. And I came across this, I think in like 2021, 22, and in 23 specifically became really seminal. It's a lecture about many things, but at the core of the lecture is asking the question about the romanticism around radical black politics and activism. Specifically, her research is looking at Black Panthers who are still in prison as political prisoners, and how the way in which we remember that movement as if they have passed while they are still very much alive, and how much of our culture loves to benefit off of our erasure in these very virulent ways, where you can make a t-shirt about someone who is no longer, who is with us, but yet you represent them on a t-shirt as if they aren't, right? So there's this very vampiric kind of quality to it. So yeah, that's one of the texts that I'm coming back to a lot in terms of trying to be precise and trying to be as honest as one can be. Lwando asked me to close with the poem.
Please.
Nice. This is a poem called Practice Makes Present. It opens with a quote from someone who I deeply respect. Her name is Christina Johnston. She was my contemporary dance lecturer at UCT. And she would often say when we were making work that it's not about what it means, it's about how does it work. Because we can make meaning all day, but we have to bring it to the floor to see if it works, right?
Sounds like a ballroom scene.
Bring it to the floor.
Bring it to the floor.
It's not so much about what it means, so much as how does it work. Christina Johnston. 1. I am moving past questions of what living means into questions of how does living work. Heaven is not a place we can enter without the requisite labor. Heaven is not a place we can enter upright, but only on our hands and knees. Prayer is divine labor. The meek shall inherit the earth, but only after they are buried in it. Christ carried his cross, and now we must carry everything he has left in his wake. When the living gets too much, I bury myself in the work. Labor is a way not to think about what death means, but to discover how it works. Mortality is the greatest gift that Eve could have ever bestowed unto us. Could you imagine if the living would not cease? 2. In 2016, when I was delirious from insomnia and ridden with nameless grief, a thought came to me in my deepest suicidal ideations. The living will end soon enough. Until then, better to see how it works. My aunt passed away. I didn't attend her funeral. I didn't attend to most things. I didn't attend to the work of living with grief, because the living would end soon enough. I sometimes think my depression is a story I tell myself to make the living end sooner, how to live in a place where the dead never die. I want to go home and tell my mother that I don't know what any of it means. I want to go home and tell my mother that the crush she gave me is hurting my back. I want to go home and tell my mother that she was right. She was always right. And so we no longer need to pretend that we don't know each other anymore. I don't know what that means. I want to make this work.
Sure. Thank you, and thank you. I have nothing else to say.
And thank you, Lwando.
Thank you.